everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Meredith Preuss, and I'm the Executive Director of the Gordon and Marion Smith Foundation for Young Artists. We work in partnership with Artists for Kids and the North Van School District to program the Gordon Smith Gallery for the general public, for art education programs, and through exhibitions. Before I introduce our speakers, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the kind of context for this talk. This is part of a series that we've been programming for 2025 called Collections and Collecting. With this series, we made a choice to take a different approach than one typically does when we think of collecting as a practice. The series aims to open the proverbial hood, and in some cases, warehouses, vaults, and archives to explore what it means to collect today. We've heard already from the perspective of curators working within institutions to activate their permanent collections to the public. And today we will hear from commercial gallery owners who work tirelessly to facilitate the growth of those institutional collections as well as private collections while nurturing artists' careers. And later this month, we'll be speaking with philanthropist, home builder, and collector Michael O'Dane about his expansive conversation that will touch on how private collecting, philanthropy, and patronship plays a critical role in sustaining the art economy within Canada. So today's talk features 3 art dealers whose galleries have innovated to adapt to changing social and market conditions. In this conversation, led by longtime culture worker Caitlin Jones, the 3 will explore innovative models and adaptations for commercial art galleries to sustain their businesses and expand the definition of how a for-profit gallery functions in today's art ecosystem. So our speakers are Amy Kazimirchuk, who's the director and curator of Pale Fire, an independent curatorial framework that supports artist practices and the production and presentation of unique projects. Previously, she was the curator of SFU Gallery's O'Dane Gallery and the events and exhibition coordinator at Vivo Media Center and the programmer of Dim Cinema at the Cinematheque. She holds an MA in curatorial studies from the University of British Columbia and a BFA from Emily Carr. Sarah Macaulay founded Macaulay & Co. Gallery in Vancouver in 2012, following her time as co-director of Blanket Gallery from 2005 to 2012. After studying art history at the University of British Columbia, her career began in unconventional spaces where she showcased the work by a close circle of artist friends. With strong community support, these grassroots efforts led to the founding of Blanket Gallery, and over time, the gallery's focus evolved to center primarily on First Nations artists, a direction sparked by her relationship with Chief Bo Dick. In 2015, she launched a second space, Ceremonial Arts, in collaboration with Dene curator Jake Kimball. Willabale is a Vancouver-based art dealer, curator, and collector, and the founder of Willabale Artist Projects, established in 2013. Born in the Philippines, Abale immigrated to Canada at age 10, and he studied engineering at the University of Waterloo and later moved to Vancouver as a process engineer. His life in the arts began as a passionate collector and transitioned into curating and ultimately founding his own gallery. The gallery began in his own apartment, where the living room doubled as an exhibition space, and from these beginnings, the gallery quickly gained attention and moved through different venues until today it now resides on Granville Island. The gallery participates in art fairs, mounts off-site art projects, and Will is also the co-founder of Combine Art Fair and is a member of the New Art Dealers Alliance communities. And lastly, our moderator, Caitlin Jones. There we go. She's a longtime culture worker, curator, and writing, working with and within a range of institutional independent contexts. As executive director of BCA, she was responsible for the development and operations of multiple affordable real estate projects for the cultural community. And as executive director of Western Front Society in Vancouver, in addition to her director role, she curated programming, policy, and dialogue around issues of urban design and development and the roles of artists within it. Prior to her move to BC, she worked at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum and rhizome.org in New York. Her writing in contemporary art and new media have appeared in a wide range of exhibition catalogs, periodicals, and other international publications. Thank you very much, speakers. I'm going to hand the floor over to you, and thank you all for being here today. We're excited to get started.
Thank you, Meredith, for the introduction and for the invitation to all of us today, and for all of you to showing up on a Saturday afternoon. There's actually a lot of things going on this afternoon, so thank you for spending your time with us. In preparation for today's discussion, I think all of us kept getting stuck on this phrase, new model. I've used this term a lot in my own writing and grant proposals, because when we look at the kind of precarity that the cultural sector always finds itself in, like a perpetual state of precarity, it's like we're always looking for something that will deliver us from this state. But new suggests that we've been operating in something that is old, and I think that's just not true. So it sort of suggests that galleries, either commercial or nonprofit, haven't always been adapting and like looking for other ways to do things, other ways to get artworks out in the world, support artists. So if you look back at the history of commercial galleries and nonprofits, you can see that these spaces have always been like testing and implementing new models, responding to ever-shifting conditions, both external ones and internal ones, in order to support their own organizations, the artists they work with, and audiences, customers, and collectors. So in our back and forth that we had before the panel over email, we thought we might frame our conversation not as a search for something new, but as an inquiry into these adaptive models, or maybe adaptive frameworks, drawing from these three panels' own histories, and then also maybe other ways of operating that they've been inspired or interested in. So then I would like to just put out a few questions to all of us to like think about as people are talking, is like, what are these external conditions, current or historical, that necessitate these ongoing adaptations? And maybe is this moment different than any other moment in history? And this is like the rise and fall of art fairs, maybe inflation, like in terms of production and shipping and staffing, the internet, technology, how have these forced new adaptations? Infrastructure and the rising cost of real estate and its availability. And like shifts in demographics and spending habits of collectors or major institutions. And then another thing I think that we will hopefully get to is, what are the goals of these adaptations, and what defines success of a model or a framework in a commercial context? I think it's probably financial viability, social community impact, better representation for a broad range of artists, and that's like within collections, personal collections and institutional collections. So I'm going to hand it over to these amazing people who I think are going to hopefully bring their own personal approach to what they're doing and the adaptive choices they're making in their own models and careers. So I was going to introduce you all, but you all just got a great introduction from Meredith, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to hand it over to Amy is first.
Okay. So thank you so much for the invitation. I opened the gallery I currently run, Pale Fire, just a little over 3 years ago. When I was talking to my colleagues about how long they've run their galleries for, it made me think about my career and my practice in longer duration through different iterations. So I'm going to take us all on a bit of a journey. It was really helpful to actually get to look back this far to think about where I'm going. So in the spring of 2020, I began writing the signature essay for Dana Claxton's Scotiabank Photography Prize catalog. The invitation gave me an opportunity to expand upon the conversation we had begun in 2016 when I curated the first exhibition of her Firebox works at SFU's Audain Gallery. Dana prefers to call these photographic displays fireboxes over light boxes because fire imbues the illumination of the women in her images with the energetic qualities associated with the element: faith, passion, and transformation. At the height of the pandemic lockdown, I found myself cocooned in my West End apartment, surrounded by photographs from Dana's portfolio and personal archive. Most of them were taken while traveling to various rural and urban, familial and foreign places. Together, they portrayed a dynamic life in motion. I was particularly captivated by a self-portrait that she took in the rearview mirror of a convertible. And in my essay, I wrote, "The photograph spatially and temporally situates her in the territory, showing what's ahead, behind her, and above her, what she's traveling towards and where she's been." Movement emerged as the theme of my essay, which felt increasingly futile to write about while inside and stationary. So encouraged and supported by Dana, I packed up the photographs and drove alone for 3 days to the southwest corner of Saskatchewan, near the Wood Mountain Reservation, where her family is from. I shared the road with long-distance truckers, oil field technicians, gas station attendants, and hotel cleaning staff. I really only encountered people who did the invisible yet essential labor that was exempt from the lockdown. I stayed in a farmhouse at the edge of Grasslands National Park for 4 days and spent my time walking amongst the buffalo grass coulees that danced in the wind. I marveled at the range of colored lichens that flourished on stones that influenced the beadwork in her images, and attuned my attention to the shimmering rattle of cottonwood trees. I was unprepared for the cinematic sunsets, which I watched every night sitting in my Jeep at the top of the driveway. They were the most beautiful moving images I had ever witnessed. The world never seemed so miraculous as when we were restricted from it, and I really began to understand how the images and forms of Dana's artworks are deeply bonded to the phenomena of this territory. I borrowed the essay's title, "Everything You Need to Know Is in the Sky," from a line spoken in Dana's 2001 film, The People Dance. In the process of writing, I came to understand that the objects, rituals, expressions, and disruptions of human culture are not separate from nature. They are nature, human nature, and they are part of what connects us to the natures of other life forms that we share the planet with. I'm not speaking solely of Indigenous art and belongings. This is true for all people in cultural genealogies, no matter how seemingly distant from our own colonization was. I don't think that artworks, which are really just human nature by any other name, are solely meant to be engaged with through collecting, exhibiting, and research. They are invitations to connect to and enjoy our nature, and sometimes the yet unencountered natures of people, animals, plants, elements, and matter in contexts that are outside of our comfort zones. I think one of the most important questions about art in our time is how we hold on to our joy, our wonder, and our reverence for experiences in life that take advantage of the miracle of living. How do we infuse this wonder into the gestures, architectures, and activities of our daily life and not just relegate them to the exceptional conditions like museums or holiday travel? On that trip, I drove kilometers beside a barbed wire fence along which someone had topped each wooden post with an upside-down rubber boot. What a wonder it was, and I wish I had a photo to show you, but I was driving at the time. The photo you're looking at here is the wall beside my desk currently, and I just wanted to point out that I still keep the photo of Dana in the rearview mirror. It's on the right-hand side, close to me at all times while I'm working. I really believe that cultivating this enthusiasm is essential for drawing new people, resources, and money into supporting art. What we're seeing in the world right now is a widespread shutdown of curiosity, contemplation, and experimentation with these phenomena. Later that year, I moved to the outskirts of Vernon and lived on a property that artists Julian Howe and Tiziana Lamilia had recently bought. Over the previous 5 years, I had regularly visited BC's interior, often to collaborate with artists on the production of videos and films. In 2017, I co-shot the video Coney Island Baby with Aaron Leon for Tanya Willard, Gabrielle LaRondelle Hill, Janine Freenajutli, and Chandra Melting Tallow at Bush Gallery, just outside of Chase. That same year, I curated and produced Feminist Land Art Retreat's 3-channel installation, Free Reign, and part of that video was shot on a farm in Heffley Creek, a connection that was facilitated by collectors and patrons Jane and Ross Hill. In 2019, I co-edited a 5-channel version of Brian Youngin and Duane Linkletter's 2012 film Modest Livelihood for Brian's retrospective Friendship Center at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And in 2021, Hannah Rickards and I operated the sound recording for the production of Tiziana Lamilia's Country Mouse, City Mouse hamster video, which we shot around Vernon Lake Country. Upon reflection, I believe that benefactor models in which patrons support the development of an artist practice by sponsoring studio space, the production of a specific project, research, or education, with the acquisition of a finished work being a gesture of reciprocity, is a form of relationship that needs to be actively cultivated. Through working on these projects, I became increasingly curious about the region's complexity. It's a thoroughfare for commercial traffic between northern BC, the North Coast, Alberta, and the South Coast. Residents live in closer proximity to large-scale resource extraction, agriculture, industrial transport, and energy development than we do in the Lower Mainland. The way that religion, industry, leisure, and culture are entwined is unique, and I loved the way that artists explored and made sense of these conditions in their work. I also loved the way that my previous practice as a filmmaker, then film programmer, was influencing how I worked as a curator. People have mixed opinions about this kind of professional entanglement, but from my own experience, working collaboratively with artists has given me unique insight into processes, relationships, and influences shared amongst them. The form of an artist roster, which has traditionally belonged to the realm of commercial galleries, always struck me as a meaningful tradition of cultivating long-term relationships that are akin to a chosen family. I was looking into the prospect of opening a gallery in the Vernon area to organize these artistic allegiances when in 2021, the White Rock Lake fire broke out just east of Vernon, and these are two views from my porch. One prior to the fire, and one on the very worst day in August, just before we were evacuated. The power of fire that summer. Sorry, somehow I just got really emotional. The power of fire that summer was sublime. It engulfed places that were dear to me, blew up relationships, and evacuated most of my community from the region. The collateral of that fire drove me back to Vancouver into a very dark winter. Paralyzed with the doubt, I reached out to an astrologer who told me that my birth chart doesn't feature any fire, a sign which inspires faith. She suggested this may inform the indecision I was feeling at the time. Fire. It has been recognized by many, and most beautifully, in my opinion, by John Vaillant in his 2023 book, Fire Weather, that we may live in the Pyrocene, a geological epoch defined by our dependence on burning fossil fuels, coined by fire historian Stephen Pine. The economic, political, and environmental conditions of this element are well charted and discussed. Less discussed are the energetic properties of the element. What does it mean to live in an epoch ostensibly governed by faith, passion, and transformation? How can art, the soul of which is motivated by these qualities, as Dana's fireboxes exemplify, guide us to harness these energies wisely? I began to research fire quite diligently and came across a passage in a lesser-known play of Shakespeare's called Timon of Athens, which is actually about the art world. The monologue is about the deception Timon experienced at the hands of his friends who were happy to revel in his generosity but offered no help when he was bankrupted from it, also about the art world. As a metaphor for his experience, Timon describes how the sun, moon, earth, and sea all derive their most vivid traits from one another. However, greed turns their symbiosis into exploitation. The moon's an errant thief, and her pale fire she snatches from the sun, is the punctum of the passage. Nabokov's novel, Pale Fire, also takes its name from this monologue. And perhaps some of you will still remember Jeffrey Farmer's installation, Pale Fire, Freedom Machine, curated by Reed Shire at the power plant in 2005. I fell in love with the puzzle of this passage, which still eludes me, and I decided to work with it as the namesake for the gallery that would frame how artists are making work under these pressures. In January 2022, I refocused my attention on developing the shared studio and gallery space that Nicole Andre and Rochelle Sawatsky had begun renovating just prior to the pandemic. This space, this is not the space, this is exercise. This space was modeled loosely on exercise, a shared studio, exhibition, and social space that was stewarded by Nicole Andre and Vanessa Disler, who comprised Feminist Land Art Retreat that I had worked with, and was shared by Rebecca Brewer, Angela Tang, Laura Piasta, and Tiziana Lamilia. These are some exhibitions in the show. This is one by Rebecca Brewer, a very early exhibition, and another one by Elizabeth McIntosh. I curated the very last exhibition in the gallery called Crystal Tongue before it closed in 2013. In the back was a small salon dubbed the Cedar Tavern, a wall of cedar shakes anointed with the name, which was borrowed from the infamous New York bar that mid-19th century male abstract expressionists hung out at, and somewhat ironically situated in a studio gallery run by women painters. One of my favorite social architectures is a small town bar. I love how they are often the hearth of a community, a place to share gossip and local news, to perform and celebrate, and to find company and solace. Coming out of a 6-year term as a curator of a university art gallery, I had grown wary of the import of formal artist talks, panel conversations, and lectures. I questioned what we were actually sharing and whether we were growing closer through the format. I was curious about the value of a casual, warm gathering space where people could spend time next to exhibitions without always having to formally engage with them under, in my opinion, too bright of lights. The Art Bar has had a strong imprint in Vancouver's art history. Recently, Instant Coffee ran the Light Bar from 2008 to 10. Robert Peterson hosted Solder & Sons Clandestine Bar on Thursdays from 2008 to 14. And Casper Freyer built the Poodle Dog Ornamental Bar in 2009, amongst others. It felt like a natural homage to the Cedar Tavern legacy to build our own. So in 2021, I met Graham Landine, an artist who had recently begun working with salvaged cedar and had access to a lot of it. He collaborated with Scott Cohen, who is known for restaurant interiors such as Faux Bourgeois, Acorn, and Paya, to design and build the salon behind the gallery. And we worked in a small team to build it over 9 months. It was imagined as a synthesis of a West Coast sauna, Southern country bar, Victorian salon, and was built entirely out of repurposed materials. We didn't spend $1 on wood. This is some pictures of it from those of you who haven't been there. We opened the gallery. Pale Fire opened in September 22 with an exhibition by Graham Landine called Triangle Beach, which was named after the bank of the Fraser River, where he collected most of the wood for his own sculptures as well as for the salon. Curating the show was a means of conveying the relationship between the formal gallery and the salon, and stressing that the latter was and is primarily an artwork, built with the same intuition, responsiveness, collaboration, and resourcefulness that artists work with. Some more photos. When I opened Pale Fire, I had no experience selling art. I have previously worked in independent collectives and publicly funded cinemas, artist-run centers, and university art galleries. However, I am genuinely a curious and adaptive person, and I began to see that the conditions that had maintained distance between publicly funded and commercially financed art galleries in Canada was changing. The blossoming diversity and multiplicity of Canadian society continues to challenge the structural and operational relevance of regional galleries, cooperatives, and artist-run centers as they have been running over the last 50 years. The professionalization of disciplines such as curating, archiving, art criticism, and history have formalized the culture of so-called artist-run spaces, very few of which are actually run by artists anymore. Repeated waves of economic and cultural austerity make it difficult for public funding to keep up with inflation, and the cost of doing business in an equally overinflated art market is debilitating to small and medium galleries. I suppose I became curious about the value of starting a gallery from scratch that didn't have a legacy to uphold or disentangle. I wondered about the possibilities of synthesizing the most valuable aspects of academic, artist-run, and commercial art models and dissolving the distinction between public and commercial financing and operations. I'm really skeptical, as Caitlin mentioned, about the notion of a model at all, because I think being flexible, responsive, and adaptable with each of our unique aptitudes and resources is really important. I am first and foremost a curator who is in love with artworks, the worlds they are made in, the contemporary conditions and history they are entangled with, and the people who bring them to life. The culture of Pale Fire is evolving from the relationships, skills, and strategies of that discipline and its legacies. And I just want to highlight a few strategies that I'm focusing on right now on my very last page. Caitlin, one more minute. This is the team that has built the salon. In June, I applied for a non-traditional liquor primary license for the salon and launched an online fundraising campaign to support it. And it's been incredibly uplifting to witness the outpouring and love of support for the space. We're currently moving through the licensing steps with a vision to open the salon weekly and reinstate evening gallery hours. I believe that the night is for lovers, and I really love the way that community flowed through the gallery when it was open in the evenings. It's really important to me to create an environment that people want to spend time in, so they'll want to spend more time with the work and think about how that work might even enter their lives. The license will also expand the potential for ticketed screenings, performances, and other events, as well as expand our rental program. The revenue from the salon is an anchor that supports the gallery programming. We are still fundraising for renovations and licensing fees, and a priority for me at this point is to change the lighting in the gallery, which I think is the most antisocial quality of the space right now. Details on how to donate can be found on the website. I'm also developing opportunities for collectors to engage with artist projects and practices by supporting the production of new works at multiple stages. For example, right now I'm collaborating with Information Office to produce an artist book with a young photographer whose work I will be showing in the spring. The work is partially funded through Canada Council funding, as well as we've invited patrons to support the book's production. In addition, I'm also brainstorming ways to create encounters and participation of the making of this artist's work. Rather than buying a print, their engagement with the realization of the work would be acknowledged with a framed photograph, so a kind of more of a reciprocal model than simply a purchasing model. I'm beginning to commission the development of projects that may be realized off-site as well as in the gallery and building support through those endeavors. So those are just two examples of some of the things that I'm doing based on my skill set, which I really could only recognize from writing this talk. So thank you very much for your patience and giving me the opportunity to share that with you.
Okay, hi everybody. Taking a bit of a different approach from Amy. I will be speaking freely, so bear with me as I ramp up and collect my thoughts regarding this topic of new models for commercial galleries. I also was struggling with the idea of new models. I feel like commercial galleries, there isn't really a formula as to how one starts a commercial gallery. If someone asked me today, I want to start a commercial gallery, what do I do? I don't know if I have steps to outline to anybody who wants to do that. I feel like every single one of our galleries have developed quite organically, as well as the other galleries within the city. It's just within whatever's in your wheelhouse and whatever resources you have access to that kind of generates the possibilities of what a gallery could be. So also my gallery has evolved in the last 13 years. So I guess the one thing that I was thinking about when I was thinking about this idea of like a new model and challenges with commercial galleries at the particular moment that we're in, because in the news, in the larger sort of art news, if anyone's been following the art news this year, there's been a lot of doom and gloom around like how the collectors are no longer collecting, the market is collapsing, and that's worldwide, galleries are closing, and that it's a sign of the times and that things are failing spectacularly. I don't necessarily hold that pessimistic view, to be absolutely honest. I do acknowledge that certain major galleries have closed. I've read interviews by, like Tim Blum of Blum and Poe, or like Olivier from Clearing, who had a multinational gallery. And I think that the circumstances around the closing of those galleries are so specific to their kind of what they want to do with life and how the gallery had evolved and how they felt that it had come to a time where they had to make a decision as to whether to continue or not. They just decided not to do it. I think the one thing that was sort of consistent, however, was that that these galleries felt that there were certain pressures around how you run a gallery. So like externally, that there's a perception around what a successful gallery looks like, and that those pressures are felt by a lot of dealers, primarily around art fairs or this idea of like expansion and continuous growth. And so I actually kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time with this idea of endless growth and how it's a kind of barometer, perceptive barometer for success externally, like from people who don't run galleries and don't understand what the day-to-day challenges and realities of it. Like it's you just think like, oh, this gallery needs to like get bigger, or like the artists have to become more and more established, and the markets have to be further along, that these artists have to evolve into like larger and larger careers, and that there has to be more and more internationalism and more art fairs, and that all of those expectations creates a pressure that in every single instance of a gallery closure this year has been a gallerist basically saying, I've had enough. The circumstances have become untenable for me to continue in this way. And it's either I scale down significantly, which they were not wanting to do, or quit. And so like this, I feel like my gallery has been a bit, like kind of organically growing, but also like has had to deal with its sort of specific realities, like being here in Vancouver where the market for commercial buying is limited, and that the market could only be so big, frankly. But like kind of this desire to support what is here, I think the city, I mean, I think everybody in the room feels this way, but it bears repeating that I think we live in a remarkable city of artists, and that the art making in the past 50 years has been quite remarkable. And I'm not sure I'm in the forest, so I can't see the forest from the trees, but I believe that it continues to be remarkable, and my gallery is in support of that. So that's a kind of fundamental feeling that I have around why the gallery needs to continue. But how do we continue in a way that makes sense, where it's these pressures are addressed and actually kind of neutralized to some degree, for lack of a better word, and this idea of kind of wanting to do things for certain artists and to bring them to new audiences and to raise the profile, sure, but to do it kind of sustainably. And I think that's sort of what what the next few slides will be about. How do we grow better? So perhaps when coming from my engineering background, when you re-engineer a process, or I was working for a company that had to build a new plant, that kind of moment where you build a new plant from scratch is called re-engineering, which of course it's called re-engineering. But what I actually did most of the time when I wasn't building this massive plant as a major multi-year project was this thing called continuous improvement, based on this Japanese idea of Kaizen, which is very nerdy kind of Toyota production model speak. But what that basically means is that you look at your operation the way things are on a day-to-day basis, and you look for incremental improvements. And I feel like I've, in some subconscious way, have taken that similar approach with running the gallery. I show up, I'm in my space, I sit with the space, I look at the art, I figure out what it is we're doing, that we've done, what have we achieved in the last few weeks, what has yet to be done, and I look for opportunities to improve small things that are incrementally maybe a cumulative effort that amounts to something significant for me, but isn't necessarily something that you could write a report about in terms of how things have been vastly improved, but it's meaningful change. So building the foundation. So that, I guess these are the things that like I was sort of thinking about. The collectors, I found that my collectors are very research driven. The art that we show, for whatever reason, tends to be a little bit intellectual and conceptual. That can't be helped. It is sort of it's the energy and the kind of thing that is attracted within this particular gallery that I've built. And as a result, the collectors that we have, what they do decide to buy, it's because they've learned and they've understood the art. So it's often a really, really slow process. And I think it's really, first off, important to understand that it is a slow process, and that these things take time, that we're not going to put up a show, that it's not going to sell out immediately, that expectation is very unrealistic. And in fact, maybe nothing sells for several months because people need to see the art, kind of wrestle with what it is, who the artist is, what their practice is about, walk away, take their time, do their Googling, sit with it, go through life, think about the art every so often, and then maybe realize down the road, like 9 months, a year and a half further out, that it is artwork that is so meaningful to them that they want to take it home and have it be part of their lives. And I actually appreciate collectors who are slow and research driven like this, because I feel like it supports sort of like my desire for why I run a gallery and what I want to do for my artists, that the people who acquire their work feel a great deal of meaning behind the acquisition of a work, and that's not just buying for something that matches their room's color scheme. Although, you know, we certainly entertain that if someone was in desperate need of something purple. Sure. Second thing, the art. This is the kind of thought that I had like a year ago where, I mean, I come into gallerying from a collector background, and I bought artworks, you know, and I understand that like I wanted objects, I understood the power of these objects, I wanted them, they were covetable, I appreciated living with them, I inspected them for their conditions and their flaws and their perfections, I questioned this surface and that like edge and so on. But I realized a while back that my job isn't really about the art. That's kind of a baseline thing that I have to do. Of course, there's going to be art objects in my commercial gallery, but that my job is really about managing relationships that I find dear within the people who I think have been core supporters of the gallery, and that's kind of, when I come in day to day, I think about the art because they're on the walls, and it's sort of what I have to address, but it's actually the relationships around the gallery that I work on. And that's kind of a shift in thinking that I think was really significant for me. Third, the artist. So with regards to the artist, I think about just sort of how I could help them build their legacy and support their careers. I guess like one little kind of anecdotal aside is that sometimes I come across an artist's work and there's possibly a desire to work together, for them to show my gallery, or for me to, like, I find their work attractive. But then there's also this thing that I ask myself, which is, am I the best gallery for this artist? And could we do the most for this artist? Or is there another like person in the city, another curator, another gallery that could possibly do better by this artist because it's more in their wheelhouse and more aligned with their program? And if the answer is like, yes, there's another better gallery, I actually probably will not work with that artist, because I think it's really, these relationships are so special and meaningful that like I would like to really make sure that artists are taken care of by the people who could best take care of them. And I think that's a really kind of important thing that I hold. Fourth, image. So yeah, so I guess it's sort of the strategies around the gallery and how we position the program is sort of strategic. I'll expand on this number 4. I'll shelve it for now. There's slides coming up that talk about this. And then digital is practice. I think this got slid in by my assistant because there's no other place for it. But we were talking about innovation. I just thought that like one of the things that I started doing in the last like couple months that's been significant to me is I'm going to talk about AI. And I don't use AI for anything core to the gallery, but I actually now use AI to plan things around the gallery that I find really, really complicated. So for instance, at a gallery dinner on Wednesday, I am not a natural host. I was really intimidated by the fact that I was hosting dinner for 30 people, and I didn't know how to start. And so I woke up one morning, and I was in the bath, and I had my phone, and I opened ChatGPT, and I said, hey, ChatGPT, I have to plan a dinner for 30 people. It's a long table dinner. I want Mediterranean food. What should I do to get started? And it told me, oh, you need like 7 tables if you want 30 people. You can get them at Home Depot. They cost this much. And it basically saved me like 4 hours, like a half a day's worth of work of Googling, like literally in 2 minutes. And I thought it was remarkable. So I basically talked to my phone to have it be my assistant to do like menial things that make me crazy. Same thing where like I have to broker this $20,000 painting across the border. Like, what are the Kuzma rules at the moment? Can you please help me find somebody who can help me broker across the border? ChatGPT. So I think as art people, we don't necessarily think about the technology that in the larger world that could be of service of us, but I think that it bears discussing at this point as a kind of a side that it is, if we're talking about innovation, like that needs to be considered at some point in terms of like the way people run their day-to-day. And then the 5th is alliances over competition. This is a kind of idea that like really began for me around the pandemic, where all of a sudden, like with Amy actually, we started, we had concern with Monica Reyes and Tobin Gibson at Unit 17 about how to best connect with the audience with the pandemic happening, and how people are not necessarily able to go outside and like see art and are trying to limit their movements to visit galleries. And so we basically collaborated and put together this thing that we called Combine Art Fair, which was just initially an opportunity for the 5 of us to like work together to get people to see art and to kind of like keep the conversation going as to what Vancouver art is, as sort of outlined by our 5 galleries, with support by Griffin Art Projects. And it was sort of like a special moment where, even though we were all in the same city, which traditionally I think other galleries might perceive as like competitive, and that like collaborating would be a kind of cannibalism. We actually didn't necessarily, we left all of those ideas at the door and just decided we would collaborate because it felt like it was the best thing to do. There's been a couple of instances where I've done that. For instance, similarly around the pandemic, started to collaborate with primarily Stephen Bolger Gallery, which is a Toronto-based gallery, but it was the same thing. Our Toronto was shut down, and we wanted to kind of maintain a connection with the Toronto audience, and so it was Stephen Bolger with Pierre-François Ouellette, our contemporain in Montreal, myself here in Vancouver, Trepanier Bear in Calgary, Michael Gibson Gallery in London. We basically did this like 5-gallery Art Toronto offsite presentation at Stephen's Gallery, which was remarkable because we did all of the COVID sort of processes where people had to sign up ahead of time, and it was time visits, and we were limiting the number of people, and the distances were spaced out so that we were always 6 feet away from each other. But at the end, because we were signing everybody up who visited, we had like 700 people over several days, and their emails and contact numbers, and it was shared across all of our galleries, which is like that kind of like contact sharing is usually, I've never heard of galleries kind of sharing their like contacts in that generous way, and I found that was so remarkable. Now I go to Toronto and I have an audience that is bigger than what I could have possibly cultivated on my own. Same could be said by any of the other 4 galleries, by the fact that they also benefited from this kind of collaborative sharing. Next slide. The other thing that I've been thinking about is this kind of like reasonable, sustainable way to take the art outside of Vancouver, which I have a great desire to occasionally just like go on a road trip and like get out of here and like share the artists' works who I work with in front of a different audience. So we kind of create these, I think the obvious thing is to go do an art fair, but it's really quite expensive. Like an art fair, you have to rent the booth, and there's travel, and there's hotel, and it's like you have to sell, like, I don't know, $75,000 worth of art before you've even broken even, and all within 4 days. So it's a lot of stress to do that at a minimum. And so we've been doing these like offsite presentations. So it's taken a couple of forms. Brussels is a place that I've been investing time in since 2017. Art Brussels is an art fair that I've never participated in, but I've gone to several times. It doesn't really make sense to me to do Art Brussels, but I appreciate the Brussels audience. So instead of doing the art fair, we've actually collaborated with somebody named Saskia Gewertz, who runs an art book publishing company called Gewertz Editions. The daughter of a really important book publisher, Yves Gewertz, who actually has connections with a lot of Vancouver artists, including Ian Wallace, and Rodney Graham. So Rodney worked with both Yves and Saskia, and Saskia has this remarkable space that we have been borrowing and renting from her during Art Brussels, and we set up shop for the month, and we do shows with her permission, and we kind of figure out what art to bring and how to tailor that for a Brussels audience. So Saskia has generously kind of been like kind of the eyes and ears on the ground, as well as a couple of other relationships that I have in Brussels, and that's been a really meaningful sort of approach where it feels intentional, and the curation is aligned with what the local audience might be interested in because of the art histories of the region, and it's this kind of relationship-based internationalism. Recently, like just last week, I was in Cologne, and I did a thing. We did Art Cologne 2 years ago. This year it didn't make sense for me to do Art Cologne, but I was in Cologne for Art Cologne, and I was in a hotel room that was funded by a collector, and we did a three-person group presentation in my hotel room that was private view only, and we actually sold work out of it, which is really remarkable. So I think these types of endeavors we're going to continue to think about in the future. Going back to Saskia, one of the things that we did this past April when we did the Brussels show with Robert Klein and Megan Hill-Carroll is produce an artist book with Robert Klein of a body work that he's never previously exhibited. So this is a book that Saskia and I ended up co-publishing with a printer based in Brussels, and the first copy of this book has sold to collectors across Europe. Robert thinks of it as exhibition in book form, where every single page that shows one of his work is a kind of like presentation of this body of work in a book. The first copy actually got placed with the Canal Centre Pompidou, so it's kind of remarkable how far it's come. Based on our initial intentions. Selling performance, this is a total aside. I'll be very quick about this because I'm over time. Selling performance art is something that is very strange. I've been wanting to like figure out how to sell performance art because I think it's an important medium. Not necessarily the performance ephemera around it, but the right to reenact the work of performance. If a collector were to buy it, what the hell do they get exactly? And so we've spent years since 2019 figuring this out. We did an art fair called a Performance Affair in Brussels. We've worked with Chantal Pangbriand to come up with a kind of performance art schema that's called a protocol that becomes the contract with the collector should they acquire the right to reperform a work. And there's been a lot of discussions with curators of performance art around this idea of selling and purchasing performance art, and also using Evan Siebens, an artist who I represent, as a kind of guinea pig in a way. She's been willing. We've actually had quite a bit of success with it, where her work has been shown at institutions around the world as a result of this kind of endeavor. So to conclude, I've been thinking a lot in the last couple of years about reimagining gallery, not necessarily just a place for objects, art objects, but rather relationships around ideas around art discursively. We want to build innovation within the gallery through care rather than speed, and to actually, instead of going faster and bigger, rather slower, more sustainable, and more intentional. Thank you.
notes here. I should say that the photos you're going to see are mostly personal photographs. I wasn't really quite sure what pictures to show you guys when talking about how a gallery operates or different ways of doing things, and so I thought, well, what you'll see is more or less just the life of gallery as life, which has been my kind of approach. Unlike you guys, I'm a bit of a gallery unicorn. I've never actually had another job. I met an art dealer called Patrick Painter in 1999. He was an LA dealer and closer. Okay. He was an LA dealer, and yeah, that's fine. And he had a summer residence in Vancouver. He rented a house in Shaughnessy. I don't know if any of you guys ever hung out there. Ian, maybe, I don't know. But it was full of artists, and it was a 24-hour party, and but Patrick was a serious guy, and he worked with incredible artists. Like, one of the first artists I ever met was Mike Kelly, which horrified me at the time, but it was like, it was incredible to me to like see that Patrick had developed this whole business and life around working with artists, and that was like a real moment for me in my life, and I was like, this is the world I'm gonna live in, no question. Let's see what I got here. Okay, well. All right, so I also want to just express my appreciation for all gallerists. Like, you're insane to do it. You come to a private gallery, and these are people who are not working on salaries for the most part, and it's like Santa Claus has come in the night and put all the Christmas presents under the tree, and there's a beautiful show, but to get there is a whole journey. So after I met Patrick, I went to arts, I studied art history for a while out at UBC. It was around the time in 2002, Art Basel Miami Beach happened for the first time, and that really changed everything. So the market and the interest and involvement of the general public in the art market, consuming, whether it's just images or buying art or just going to openings, all of a sudden became like, it went into overdrive. And I got a bird's eye view through my relationship with Patrick, who was sort of like at the crest of that wave, to see this incredible exuberance and excitement and like the rise of the art gallery and the art dealer. Of course, art dealers and galleries have always been important, and they've always been around. But it really kind of became something that people like you and I or anyone could sort of participate in. In 2004, I started putting on shows just for my friends, mostly painting, because at the time there was, Vancouver was a real photo town and conceptual town, and all the young people I knew were just wanting to make paintings, abstract paintings. And so sort of as a reaction to what was going on, we started putting on shows in empty storefronts, and 2005, I opened my a first gallery called Blanket. And so that was $200 a month rent kind of thing. We would sell enough work to pay the rent and buy beer for the openings. That was fun. I also saw a show at the Contemporary Art Gallery that year, which was another kind of moment for me, called Supernatural, and it was curated by Roy Arden. It was Neil Campbell, who continues to be one of my favorite artists, who was teaching at the art school at the time, and Chief Bo Dick. I saw the work, and it was just like one of those moments where I was just like, okay, I didn't even understand what it was, and I didn't for many years, as it turns out, but I was like, I need to have this in my life somehow. So I spent the next 2 years trying to meet Bo, And we eventually did, and then we did a show, but that's all. It was just kind of like, sometimes you meet an artist and they just kind of crack your brain open a little bit to see things in a different way. And also to come in contact with someone who had this relationship to community, and also be such an unbelievable visual artist. 2006, an LA collector who we knew invited my partner and I to open up a second space. We opened a gallery in Los Angeles called the Balmoral, and so we were doing shows every month in Vancouver, every month in Los Angeles. I had a 2-year-old. Like, it was insane beyond belief. But LA at the time was really a cool scene where this sort of like collectors and artists, senior artists, dealers, the prep people, everybody was like mingling. There was a lot of exuberance because of all of this kind of like rise after Art Basel, Miami Beach sort of started. And galleries, local galleries, would often borrow artists from other galleries within the city and show them in group shows, which was very like sharesy and community driven, and that also kind of really always stuck with me as something that I wanted to have in my life. And when you have a gallery, as you've heard, like you can make your bed any way you like it. And so there's a tremendous amount of freedom to cultivate in your space, and your community of your audience and your artists it's completely up to you. In 2011, I partnered with, and I'm just going to talk about some of the different things I experimented with. I partnered with the Michael O'Brien Family Foundation. Some of you probably remember Satellite Gallery. So it was a big open floor concept. I had a commercial gallery, and then Satellite, which was MOA, Belkin, and Presentation House, now known as Polygon Gallery. They would do their programming, and I was doing my gallery, so it was kind of like a little bit subversive, having the public and the private mingling together, which I liked. I don't really know if it really helped the business side of things, but certainly having proximity to those institutions and seeing how they were doing exhibitions informed how I wanted to do exhibitions at the gallery. 2012, I just started my own gallery, Blanket. I closed Blanket. I opened the gallery with a show with Bo Dick called Ceremonial Art. So I have 2 galleries. I have Macaulay, and then I also have Ceremonial Art, which I do happen at Macaulay to work with Indigenous artists, all Indigenous artists at this time, but it's not part of my mandate. Ceremonial Art, that is part of Ceremonial Art's mandate, is to work with First Nations artists. So it came out of a show I did with Bo called Ceremonial Art, where we showed these masks, these Atlacan masks for half of the show, and then they were taken down halfway through the show up to Alert Bay and burned during a potlatch. And so it was this, again, kind of like, there were a lot of conversations we were having about the line between the sacred and you know, the art object, and so that's kind of how that gallery started. I would do 1 show a year within my gallery under the name Ceremonial Art as a sort of ongoing investigation into those concepts. But it wasn't until the pandemic, when I had like some extra time on my hands, that I built an actual home for it. I hired a gallery sitter, Jake Kimball, who has now turned into a partner really in the gallery. He's a Dene artist and curator. The whole program is just run by him. I'm more of like a support and a mentor in that capacity. Also in 2020, which I thought was kind of interesting, we did a project in the backspace project room of my gallery called Telephone. And that was, we picked the first artist, and then after that, that artist chose the next artist, and that's how the whole program ran for 2 years. So it was like, I would help sell the work, And I would also coach. A lot of the artists had never had a show before, so there was kind of like this checklist that they had to provide, and I would work with them, help them price their work, give them a little bit of experience on how to like interact with a commercial gallery and see what those kind of possibilities were for them. It was a really great program. I enjoyed it immensely, and we did a lot of like incredible shows. So it was kind of like, it was like an artist-run center, but it was like an artist-run commercial gallery. It was funded privately, but it was a room I wasn't using, so it wasn't like costing me a lot of money. But I thought that was kind of like a fun thing. Lastly, I did a project in New York where I partnered with a couple of other galleries that I know from the art fair circuit, and from New York and Dubai, and we shared a space. And we kind of like with those galleries that you were talking about, Will, we shared our mailing lists, we supported one another in any way we could. And that was kind of like what I did for Telephone for artists, we were trying to do for dealers, because I do believe that dealers, like, I don't know, things got very professionalized. Like the downside of the whole thing after Art Basel was that the art world became very professionalized. Like when I started in it, it was like the best parties and like it was so much fun, and then it became like high stakes and everyone was wearing suits and it was like, oh, are you invited to the VIP opening? And like boring, like as far as I'm concerned, you know. And it kind of alienated dealers, I think, from one another. But it seems like we're maybe kind of going over onto the other side of that now, and that model that like so many galleries sort of became a slave to. Your artists expect you to go, you know. They want you to go, and that's fair. But it becomes like unbearable at a certain point. Not to say like art fairs can be great and you can do a lot of good things, but they can also be a huge pain. I think that's it.
Is that what you're going to
Oh,
wrap
I was
it
going
up?
to show you more pictures. I didn't. This is from Diana. So that's the space in New York. Women, Life, Freedom. That was for my Iranian partners. There's Jake, who I run Ceremonial with. This is Old Crow. That's where we moved to the new galleries. Me and Janine, some performances. Lawrence, of course. Friends who always show up. There's always like friends are a big component. Visiting, art fairs, Dana. That was Diana in New York. That's that space. Performance. My parents. This was at Diana too. That's the late Carrie Dick, wonderful Carrie. My son, who I sent to work at the gallery in New York for a year after he graduated from high school. And, you know, this was actually when we were hanging the first Telephone show, because the first artist was Tom Sue. Lawrence. This is one of my partners in New York, who I ran Diana with. That space now has turned into this alternative art fair that he started working only with artists with disabilities called Open Invitational. And David struggled for many years trying to run his gallery and sell work, and he is like the hardest working man in show business. And it was so hard for him to survive. But this thing that he started with Open Invitational has been a huge success, so happy for him. Christmas dinner in the gallery. I completely forgot, but I also had a gallery in San Francisco for 6 months called Gallery Weekend. But that was not a new model. That was just me wanting to be in San Francisco every weekend. Partnerships at art fairs. Sorry.
We're trying to get through this here
Yeah.
so that we have time for discussion. So maybe we'll just start, you can like flash through and
Sure.
we can like, I'm sure you all have questions, but And I really think, I'm sorry, Meredith, we really didn't answer this question of new models at all. But I think what all three of your really great presentations showed is this, like, yeah, this constant responsiveness, constant adaptation to what is required by the market, by a pandemic, by your own life, you know, and that's really maybe the most productive or fertile piece from. One thing I think you all kind of spoke about was this kind of idea of collaboration, either in space, like with your gallery, and you've talked about it a little bit, Will, this idea of like galleries working together to kind of lift each other for the best of your own business models, but also for the best of artists. And maybe people have a little bit more they want to say. And Amy, you know, your gallery is your vision, but it's lifted up by lots of people. Maybe you want to expand, Will? I'm just thinking about your, like, if this thing of like galleries in Europe and like using this kind of like real partnership approach is something that you really want to invest more resources, time in the future, and why, maybe?
Yeah, so I guess it's a little bit more organic, like the whole kind of idea of collaborating with other galleries. The Brussels, and I think every instance it makes sense because there's a kind of conviviality amongst the participants. Like my Brussels partner, Saskia Gevaert, is just a remarkable person who, you know, like it's kind of it's really amazing because there is a Vancouver Brussels discourse that happens because she and her dad have been participating, working with Vancouver artists for like, you know, 40 years, and it's honestly quite strange to me that, like, even though I'm not connected with that previous generation of artists that they worked with, that like I'm working with them and they're working with another generation of Vancouver artists. But I think there's a kind of just a general, I'm excited to see her. She's excited to like figure out the next show with me, and like, and that kind of conviviality is like really important. It's the same thing with my collaborations with Stephen Bolger. We just have, like, he's the best. Honestly, like really stand-up kind of individual, and we respect each other an incredible amount. And so it's the same thing when we kind of think that there's an opportunity for me to like show up in Toronto and like for him to offer up space and to collaborate on certain things together. We just are both mutually excited about it. And those opportunities, I think, maybe it's more that like as dealers we should listen and pay attention to those opportunities, because traditionally maybe it's not the mode that dealers normally operate.
Can we get into like the brass tacks, or for lack of a better word though, like financially, like this is why, right? Like it works because it's nice to be in collaboration with people, but like we need to share resources, right?
Oh, 100%.
Can we just be really,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like I was talking to a colleague yesterday who did the Armory, which is a big art fair, and they did the main space. Their booth cost $80,000 US. It's a 4-day event. Plus, so that's probably like what, 120 Canadian plus another like 30 grand for like shipping and this and that. So he's a great, like, he can sell like anything, and he works with great artists. He sold $500,000 worth of art, and he just broke even. And that's all of his time. You know, and then the problem comes where it's like you spend all of this time and effort, and then what about the programming? What about the shows that you do at the gallery? Right. He's like doing so many fairs, and like at the end of the day, like he's like, I'm making like a lot of money for my artists, for my staff, myself, blah, 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 but he's like, I don't do any shows anymore because there's no time. Yeah. So it's like he's like compelled on this like endless wheel of art fairs, and then there's no shows, and then like what do you have in a gallery for? You know what I mean? Like I don't know.
The one encouraging thing about like the art press talk about how the market is failing is that I think for the first time people are questioning whether galleries should just automatically do the art fairs that they've already been doing. There's now a questioning. So like I've questioned it for years. Like I was with Art Toronto, year in year out I have a discussion amongst other dealers, and I felt like I was a unicorn. I was the one person who didn't want to do the fair, where everybody was just like, yeah, of course we're going to do Art Toronto. And I was always sort of questioning like, should we do Art Toronto? Like it doesn't seem like it's like a great fit or whatever. The reason happens to be like weird timing or something. But now everyone's sort of questioning that. And I think that pause is really crucial. Like people have to think about whether these decisions make sense and not just like go like headstrong into.
But it's easy, like we can be adaptive. Like no one's, at the same time, no one's holding a gun to your head saying you have to go to the art fair. You can do whatever you want.
I know, but there is sort of an expectation. Like,
no,
it's like no one's holding a gun, but like there is, if you don't do it, all of a sudden, like in Toronto, it's like they'll think your gallery would have closed, because it was so ubiquitously participated in that like the odd person who doesn't participate all of a sudden is like, odd man out. So, yeah, the pressure's there for sure. Yeah.
Amy, you brought something up that I really like, which is that it's not new, it's very old, but it's the patron model. And I'm wondering, like, if you told us about your, like, this idea where you're trying to convince collectors or patrons to kind of invest at earlier stages in a project to kind of, that your last example that you showed. And I'm wondering if you could just, for me, just kind of like flesh that out a little bit as like how you see that as being something that's beneficial to you as a gallerist and also to your artist and I guess to the patron collector too.
Well, maybe I'll just say that it's just, sort of the beginning stages of its fruition. But I do think one thing I worry about for us in Canada, in particular, I'd have to think through whether other sort of socialist structured cultural funding systems in other countries might operate the same way. I'm not sure that they do, but I am concerned. I think that one negative side to having a cultural ecology that's so supported by the government is that the economics of it becomes totally invisible. Nobody has any idea what any of this costs. Nobody knows what today costs, which is really a lot of money to put on this event. And yet nobody had paid to get in here. And there are very, very few things in the world anymore that you do not pay to have a direct experience with. Of course, we all do pay for it because we pay taxes. And it requires massive industry to also pay taxes to fund it. But I do sometimes feel like the invisibility of that is a detriment to the industry's success. Because I think if we don't see what the cost of it is really hard to understand also what the value of it is and what we're actually engaging with. And so things just become really abstract. Even on the level of pricing art, somebody says like, well, what the hell is it worth that for? And, and to think through, like, the first thing someone always wants to ask is, well, how many hours did it take that person? And they want to know because that's how we qualify value in labor, is on an hourly wage. But that is, of course, not how things actually work. And there are material costs. There are thinking about an artist's entire lifetime of work and the education and everything that's gone into the creation of that thing. So anyway, we could talk about that separately. But one thing why I think it's a detriment is that I think that in arts and culture, when we're asked then to stand up to support things, we get a bit chuffed about it. It's like, what do you mean I have to pay to go to that talk or that event? Or what do you mean I have to pay, myself? I had a complete flip out at the VAG the other day at how much a membership costs now. And I was like, oh, maybe that flip out is because weirdly, the price hadn't been raised in like 25 years. And now we're having to actually face the reality of what all of this infrastructure costs that we want to participate in. And so I guess maybe part of my thinking was of course, patrons, donors, collectors contribute to the exhibitions at private and public, public galleries all the time. There's lots of ways in which we have these systems in place, but what it occurred to me was that there are other ways to get to know what the process of making work and the cost of it is. And that I thought, well, maybe we'll just like pull the curtain open on that a little bit and get people more involved in the production side of things and the development of the journey of the making of work so that people feel more invested in understanding where that money goes for. And in a way, it's no more, no less amount of money than simply buying an artwork. But I thought, well, maybe on an experiential level, it's actually just more interesting. Like maybe to me, my question is the particular model of how people, the interaction of purchasing art, maybe it's just like kind of not that interesting sometimes. And maybe there's like a more interesting way to be in the world of these beautiful things that are made together. And it's not new at all. I don't see it happening a lot right now. And I think that, I think it's something that we could explore. Just to also get into the brass tacks, sometimes I feel like I open a show and I literally want to write on the wall like how much it cost. Because I think that this is also something that is maybe happening too with the financialization and the professionalization of both art fairs and also the art economy, is that as the potential to make money off of art grows, the amount of people that want a piece of that grows. And you go to I was reading, anyone get the Canada Council report or the letter from the director that just came out, where she's like, we're proud to announce that $135 billion went into the economy. And I was like, yeah, and guess how much money of that actually went to the people that do all the work? Probably almost nothing. It goes to shipping companies, it goes to transport, it goes to hotels, it goes to highways, it goes to airlines, it goes to, these massive infrastructures that are also part of the art economy and are necessary. But it's like, when you boil it down to how much goes back on the ground to the people that are working every day to make these objects that we all fall in love with, it's really not that much. And so I think that that's a kind of economic structure we have to look at. And I think that to go to an art fair, I know some people are making a lot of money, but who's making the money is the company that runs the art fair. And these are like massive global multinational companies, like huge. Like these people do not need money from the 5 of us galleries in Vancouver going to their art affairs. Like they are running like huge, like FIFA style, conferences and stuff like that. So I think that we also need to be, I do wish, and we don't have the time to do it today, but I really do wish like the economic weight of the work that we do was more transparent, and that then we could also kind of understand like what we're up against when we're trying to do some of the things, and when we have expectations on each other. Like when an artist, has an expectation that they want you to be doing X and X and X with their practices, like, okay, well, do you want to know what the price tag on that is? And at the same time, what's the price tag on the work? So those are sort of like, we talk about that behind closed doors a lot, because it's really difficult to talk about. It's really uncomfortable and it sucks. But what was the question? Yeah, so I think that maybe getting people involved at different stages is a way to buffer that. And, just the last thing I'll say about it, because we all know it's happening. We're watching what's happening politically in the world, and a lot of this work is made through public funding, and that's kind of the interesting thing. A lot of the work is made through public funding and then purchased privately after, but that money is like really drying up, and it's for sure not getting any more robust. And so I also think of ways in which maybe we just have to like shift where that money comes into the process of keeping the work getting produced. So, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to use that voice when referencing the director of the Canada Council. But I was like, where did that number come from? $135 billion or something? I was like, I would love to see like a tenth of that. I don't know where that's going.
Well, it would be interesting to see where that the math on those things, and this is something that you and I talked about, Amy, is this idea of like the last 10 years, and part of this neoliberalism is this idea that culture is an economy, like an economic driver. And we've been using, or don't say we, like the royal we has been using this as a like way, I mean, Esther, I think, snuck out, but she has a lot to say on this piece too. It's like, it's an economic driver, it's an economic driver. It's, yes, but also that's not the point of what we don't do this because it's an economic driver.
Yeah.
And then when we double down on this idea of culture as an industry, that is investable and makes X billion dollars in Canada, you kind of lose the whole point of like what it is we're doing. And also we lose that battle every time. We've been making that argument for 15 years, and pipelines get the money, forestry get, like that's where those are the economic drivers.
Yeah.
It's not culture, So you know what I mean? We've lost that argument, yet we continue to keep making it. So I feel like it's time to make
a different argument. Yeah. And I think I saw a great meme that happened during the recent BCGEU strike in tandem with the postal workers strike that said something like, how come the police is never asked to defend its economic contribution? As in, like, we have many services in the country that use massive amounts of tax dollars that are not being asked to defend what they're contributing back to the economy monetarily. It's just a matter of social value that determines who has to defend their value and who doesn't, I mean, we don't have to get into politics a lot, but we know what just happened with the Vancouver civic budget, which is exactly that, like a massive, 50% increase to a department that doesn't have to defend the value of that increase whatsoever. Yeah. Whereas, we kind of like have to beg on our hands and knees for the same.
Should we open it up for questions from the audience? We have, I think, about 10, probably, 5, but let's make 10. Yeah, 10 minutes. Oh, Ian?
I think Amy brought up some very important points. Thank you, Amy. When we think about cultural events and art, we tend to be highly idealistic. And in support of Amy's point, the reality there is often financial. But I think we have to, in terms of the question of this event that we're all in here right now and sharing as a community of people that are idealistically involved with sharing in the experience of the beauty of the work that we have around us, and the fledgling institutions of these gallery spaces. In fact, Meredith, in her introduction, actually brought up Anthem Properties, who's the sponsor of this event. So there's a private group that's supporting a public community, a community event like we have here. And I think that should be acknowledged in reference to
totally.
Amy's points that came up. Is that, these things are not necessarily secret events.
Yeah.
They're advertised. And when we go to an event, I think it's important to acknowledge those financial supporters or sponsors, whether they're public or private or individual, as to how it's paid for, because these things have to happen, and this is how it happens. And we have to be realistic about it. So I think your points are very, very important.
Yeah, I think I really love, actually, one of my favorite things to do when I go into a gallery is look at their donor wall, which I think is a beautiful thing, and we're making one at my space for all the people that are have donated to making it happen. And I think they're beautiful things, because I was looking at the Western Front one the other night when I went to Warren Arcan's memorial screening. I just think they're like this very subtle but important kind of prayer to the fact that we can all still keep going. It's like, oh, look at that. I saw your name on the Western Front one, Caitlin.
But most private galleries don't have a donor wall. Like, I don't have any donors.
No, but I think it's kind of an interesting thing to consider. I mean, donor is like a donor,
there are no
but
donors.
a public acknowledgement of the people who contribute. Let's put it that way. I really love them when I get to see them. I think it's, I think that there's maybe ways. I'm not sure if all commercial galleries, because we don't all have the same structure, but I think that they're almost like having the spirit in the room of all the people who contribute and participate. Even sometimes I just want to see a wall of everybody who like hangs out there or whatever, like those old Italian restaurants where you would like see the photos of all the people who came to the restaurant. I don't know. I feel like energetically they're really important. So I agree with you, Ian, that there are lots of people, private and personal, who are contributing to these spaces, and that it's important to acknowledge them too.
Want to be a part of our donor wall?
No, but that's the thing. I don't want a donor because I don't want to answer to anybody. You know, I work for my artists and I work for the collectors who, support the gallery, but I don't work for, I wouldn't work for someone like that. That's why the gallery.
And that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't have a board of directors.
Your dogs.
My dogs.
I have just a question that kind of calls back to what you guys were talking about earlier around the kind of pressure you face as gallerists to go to these art fairs from the artists themselves. And it seems like, you're talking about the cost of doing business just to even get there, you're breaking even. What is the benefit of these fairs and this more global or national exposure to the artists themselves? Do you feel like, after having watched these artists' careers for many years, does that is that payoff there for them, or
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes it is, But I would say, for the most part, it's more like relationship, like long-term relationship building with, curators, institutions, collections, foundations, whatever it happens to be. So the art fairs, they can sometimes be great, and things can really happen there. And certainly for some of my artists, and over the years, definitely. But it's not quite what it seems, But it's like, if you don't go to Hollywood, you might not get in the movie, right? So, so there's a bit of that, right?
I think what everybody wants is they want to just keep thriving and growing, like in our professions, right? So we all do things in our jobs, in our livelihoods, that create new opportunities, right? That give us, the next contract, or that give us, an opportunity to really challenge ourselves and make something new and be part of a new community, or broaden our horizons. I think that's just a natural human inclination to want to grow like that. And I think that art fairs are one way that happens. There's many ways. I know that for me, I have my version of it, which is that my contact list is very much in the world of curators and writers and art critics and historians and museum directors, et cetera. And so one of the things that I know I can do with the people I work with is get them into shows, and think about public collections, and think about commissioning works, and think about publications, and thinking about what I would call sort of embarrassingly, developing the cultural capital of the work. But that is part of what's also necessary to also cultivate the financial value of work, is that you can totally see it. You can see, sometimes people can be really, especially for young artists, it's everybody's waiting for someone else to make the first move. It's oh, is that artist gonna do it? And you just need one very confident, not one, but let's say the first confident institutional show, a group show even, for a curator or someone an institution we recognize, to say yes, I am saying I am going to put my money behind that artist. And then you see how other people want to start to coalesce around a practice. And so, it's not just, there's a lot of, and this is what's incredible about the invisible labor that goes behind, why artworks cost what they do, is there's so much work that gets done to develop that type of value and that trust and that investment in work from our community, and sometimes it takes years, really years, to get those conversations going. But I think they're also really meaningful and beautiful. And I think that's one thing that maybe if there's a reason why I just tilted my talk a little bit to think about curating is like, I know these two both do that a lot. And the amount of time I know Sarah has spent, with her artists making work, of finding means for it to happen, it's really such a huge invisible part of the work that, and the input we give, even just processing sometimes, is so extensive that it's really an equally important part.
But it's fun, right, Amy?
It is, you know what, it's always fun. And I think that maybe the other reason why I maybe just skewed my talk a little bit is it's like, it's really fun, it's really meaningful, and it's really serious. And it's like, what are we gonna do with the capacity to make that work continue to thrive in the world? Because anyway, because what's the economic value of that to us as a world? That's what I think, I think that in the arts, that's what we're all really having to contend with. Because for some reason, sometimes I feel like we have some equation in the world where it's like not fun equals really high economic value, and like fun and meaningful is like not worth anything.
I know what you mean.
So, but that's, I'm sorry, no, I'm not, I need to retract the word fun, because it's really not what it is. It's very serious, actually. And it's very serious because you have to really believe it. That's what I think is really important. When you're doing something you really believe in, there's words like fun, difficult, worth it, all disappear. You're kind of just in the job of really believing in something. And it's when you step out of it that you go like, what the hell was the point of that? Or like, is that worth doing? Or was that fun? Or did I just like destroy myself? But I do think that one thing I love about my colleagues and being in this world is that I see people living in like a very true belief in what they're doing a lot. And I can't say that for a lot of people I know working in other industries. So I stay here with the believers.
Well, that feels like a nice spot to kind of like shut it down. Great.
Thank you all for coming.